Welcome to PHMSA's presentation on the training requirements for the transportation of hazardous materials found in Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, Parts 172, 700 through 704. In this presentation, we will cover 4 of the 5 elements that make up compliant hazardous materials training. The 5th element is in-depth security training, which we may cover in another presentation in the future. Let me be clear. Attending this webinar does not satisfy the 3-year requirement of hazardous materials training. This informational webinar will cover the elements of compliant training, and its purpose is to educate and/or reinforce the requirements under the rules. We have noted a trend amongst industry in that training violations are the #1 discrepancy found during an inspection. This webinar will hopefully address and clarify those findings in order for hazmat employees to be fully trained and to properly document that training. We will also provide some resources in the form of links and downloadable materials at the end of this presentation. These links are available during this presentation in the Downloads pod and Web Links pod, respectively. We will also follow it up via email, and it will be linked in the description of the YouTube video post-recording of this webinar. Let's get started. The Federal Hazardous Materials Transportation Act, enacted in 1975, is the foremost federal law in the U.S. in which the transportation of hazardous materials is regulated. The bulk of the law is codified in Title 49 CFR Parts 100 through 185 and affectionately referred to as the HMR. As you can see, the top 2 violations most noted by PHMSA investigators are training related. As I mentioned in my intro, this has been a common occurrence in violation history amongst the hazmat industry. We have also found that follow-up inspections with the companies does not improve even in a relatively short time frame. Inspections a year later revealed that approximately 3/4 of issues found regarding training still remained. So, you might be asking, what is hazmat training and what does it look like? How do I know if I'm compliant? How do I document my training in order to satisfy the DOT rules and a DOT inspector? Well, let's find out. The DOT is looking for a systematic program that covers your company's nuances and details regarding the hazmat regulations. We can't provide you with a template, as we can't know and cover all of the details of every hazmat shipper out there. I had an instructor that used to say, the DOT is a very benevolent department. In many ways, I agree with him. The DOT is allowing you to cover your bases and not dictate your program's details. We feel that no regulation could ever cover every company's situation, so we do leave the regulations on training rather broad. Although the regulation is broad, you must ensure you are covering all your bases here, hence the term systematic. It is up to the hazmat employer to ensure the program is up to speed on how to thoroughly train your hazmat employees for both initial and recurrent hazmat training, and to document this training in the proper manner. A few slides ago, I mentioned that hazmat training is required by law. Through the eyes of the DOT, this should be enough for offerers and transporters of hazardous materials to conduct themselves accordingly and be compliant. However, there are industry benefits in having a systematic and robust training plan, in addition to avoiding potential civil penalties issued by DOT. Training is the foundation for which we all learn new material or continually review material to stay abreast of changes. This is no different in the world of hazmat transportation. The benefits include the following. Safety culture in the workplace is a dynamic entity in which emphasis should be placed on continual improvement. You probably know more than I the benefits of safety in your workplace. Skilled employees are always desired in the workplace. My boss throws out this saying from time to time from Richard Branson: train your people well enough so they can leave. but treat them well enough so they don't want to. On behalf of all employees, thank you, Richard Branson. Protection of the public. Admittedly, the DOT is charged with enforcing this standard. However, we can't be everywhere, and we rely heavily on the training programs of the shippers and carriers to mitigate the risks of hazmat shipments. None of us wants an incident of hazardous materials release, especially one that is catastrophic. Unaware if you are a hazmat employer? You are captured under the regulations when a person who uses one or more employees in transporting hazardous materials in commerce, meaning you are trading within the jurisdiction of the United States, causing hazmat to be transported within the United States or its jurisdiction, or some form of packaging or testing of packaging intended for use in transporting hazardous materials. Wow. So as a hazmat employer, do I need to train all my employees to be compliant with the regulations? The answer is no. The benevolent DOT only requires employees who are designated as hazmat employees to be trained in accordance with the regulations. How do you know if your employees are hazmat employees? Easy. That determination depends on your operations. If your employees do any or all of the items shown here, they are a hazmat employee and should be trained accordingly. Training violations may be upwards of $1,500 per occurrence. A colleague of mine says quite often that if you are on the fence as to whether an employee should be trained as a hazmat employee and they make, let's say, $25 an hour, and it takes a full day to run them through proper training, it's only $200 versus the alternative civil penalty amount. Now we'll get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the 4 elements of hazmat training that will be covered in this presentation. These 4 elements we will go to in depth on during the rest of this presentation. In-depth security training may be covered in a separate presentation in the future. Driver training for carriers of hazmat by highway requirements can be found in Title 49 CFR 177.816 for more details. General awareness training is the most basic of training types, in that it will include an overall or broad understanding of the requirements found in the HMR. We want the hazmat employee to understand where to find the regulations in general, become familiar with how to navigate the regulations, and have a sense of scope in where these rules apply. General awareness training is required to cover how to identify hazardous materials and recognize the hazard communication, such as markings, labelings, and placardings, and the associated hazards with each class of hazmat. All hazmat employees are required to receive general awareness training, unless accepted. PHMSA offers online general awareness training on its website, and I'll provide that link towards the end of the presentation, as well as place it in the follow-up email you'll receive after this presentation and in the description link in the YouTube recording. The second element of hazmat training is function-specific training. We will spend some time on this topic as it is generally the most misunderstood element that is required of all hazmat employees. Specific functions of a hazmat employee's position will dictate how much function-specific training they will require. If you are a company of one, then function-specific will include all elements of offering or carrying hazardous materials. On the other hand, if there are multiple personnel who have a role regarding a pre-transportation function, you may separate those rules and train specifically to the needs of the persons responsible for those roles. For instance, if you have one or more hazmat employees whose only function is to draft shipping papers, you only need to conduct detailed function-specific training on shipping papers for that employee. If you have another employee that does the packaging of the hazmat, that or those individuals need the detailed function-specific training for packaging selection, package preparation, to include closure instructions. If this same person also applies the marks and labels as required, then hold and document those specific functions as well. The thing to take away here is that for each general topic for which an employee is tasked, you must perform that function-specific training and document each function in which they were trained. Reiterating here that it is up to the company to train and document on the specific needs of its employees. A prime example of function-specific training is classification of a material. If you are the manufacturer of a material, you must follow the tests as laid out in the HMR to determine the properties of the material and assign the material to a hazard class and determine a proper shipping name. If your company ships a manufacturer's material as part of your business, your determination is based on the manufacturer's information, such as the SDS or safety data sheet. This is function-specific training. Being able to classify and/or determine a hazmat is a pre-transportation function. You should also document this training in the employee's training record. I mentioned earlier that an employee who prepares hazmat packages for transportation will need function-specific training on all aspects of preparation, such as filling limits, packaging selection, marking, labeling, and the most overlooked is closure instructions. Each performance-oriented packaging type comes with a set of closure instructions, either as a separate document or sometimes printed right on the packaging. These instructions must be followed, as this is exactly how the package was tested to become UN certified. Deviating from these instructions, even using a different type of tape, may be considered a violation and can cause an incident during transportation. If you are uncertain about whether your company is following the closure instructions for your packaging types, I recommend contacting your manufacturer for copies of the closure instructions for all your packaging types and conducting a comprehensive review. This, too, should be documented that this type of function-specific training has been conducted with each employee with the responsibility. Special permits is another function-specific training topic. If your company offers a commodity under a special permit, whether it's issued to you or you are just utilizing it in accordance with the rules, you are required to have read and understand the details of each special permit that you offer for transportation. Once you have covered that training, you would then document in each hazmat employee's training record that they have been trained in special permits and list the number. The example given here is the Department of Transportation Special Permit 8451. For these three modes of transportation, you should be touching on as part of your function-specific training as well. Air, highway, and vessel transportation have some additional operational rules in which you must adhere to as either a shipper or carrier. Document each as appropriate as part of your employee's training record. In our guide to developing a hazmat program, which you can find on our website and in the downloads pod here, is a comprehensive and detailed brochure which will help you develop your training program. Also included is the function-specific training checklist to help you determine the broad topics in which you should be training and documenting. You may even want to consider utilizing this as part of your employee's training record. As you can see, function-specific is the barometer in which we base the acumen of hazmat knowledge of each hazmat employee. Be sure to document each employee's function-specific training. The third element of hazmat training is safety training. This is another element of training that is required by all hazmat employees. In general, your employees will receive, as part of this requirement, an overview of safe handling of the products and commodities that the company ships. Accident avoidance, proper handling, and emergency response information in the event of an incident or accident are some examples. Safety training topics as part of your company's OSHA or EPA training can be utilized to satisfy the DOT requirements, provided it covers the topics as listed on the previous slide, such as hazards of the products, safe handling, emergency response information, methods on accident avoidance, and proper procedures for handling packages containing hazmat. You will then document this as an element of training on your hazmat employees training record. The fourth element of hazmat training is security awareness training. Once again, this element is a requirement by all hazmat employees. We want the hazardous materials community to recognize and understand the responsibility in keeping our transportation system safe. In this training, drive home the point that hazmat can be utilized for a purpose in which it wasn't intended in order to do harm to persons or property or the environment. The DOT would like for you to improve on your methods to enhance the security of hazmat while in transportation and train on those methods. In addition, also become aware of how to recognize and respond to possible security threats. Keep in mind that not everyone has the best intentions when it comes to the security of our workplaces and nation as a whole. Any effort to reduce the risk of misuse of these materials is a positive step. PHMSA will soon have a module on security awareness at the same length that we offer general awareness training. Keep an eye out for that, it's coming soon. The DOT does not approve or certify anyone's training program. It is up to the hazmat employer to certify that a hazmat employee is trained and competent to perform the tasks for which they are responsible. I get asked all the time, can I perform all the training myself as a hazmat employer, or do I have to use an outside training company? The answer is yes and no, respectively. You may conduct all training in-house if you wish. There are plenty of third-party companies that can provide a myriad of training options for you. Some good, some not so good. So do your research if you choose to go with a third party. I do caution you, however, that unless you pay for that company to specifically address on-site function-specific training, you are probably not receiving everything you need to be DOT compliant. Just as it is impossible to write the regulations to cover all companies' needs, it is just as difficult to have a training company cover everything you need in an 8-hour online training session. There are companies out there that may cover specifics of your company on an individual contractual basis, and it will, or at least should, cost significantly more as they will need time to assess your company and put together a specific training package to cover all of your needs. Be wary of the company that says you are DOT compliant with their pre-packaged 8-hour online hazmat training module. I would agree that it most likely covers general awareness, safety training, security awareness, but doubt it covers function specific. If you poach a hazmat expert from another business and bring them on board your company, that person may use the training received from their previous employer, but again, you need to cover the function-specific details that are part of his or her new duties and document that in addition to the general training received by their previous employer. As a newly appointed hazmat employee at a company that you have 90 days to complete initial hazmat training. If your employer has not provided you that training in the allotted time, you should bring that to his or her attention. During those 90 days, said employee must be directly supervised by a certified hazmat employee. When I say directly supervised, I do mean just that. Shoulder to shoulder, as they say, when performing any type of pre-transportation function regarding offering hazardous materials for transportation. It cannot be the scenario of the boss in the upper floor listed as the supervisor of the warehouse worker on the ground floor. It does not work that way. Once a hazmat employee is certified by their hazmat employer, that employee's training is good for 3 years, at which time that employee is due for recurrent training. You may opt to hold an abbreviated training regimen, as it is just a refresher. A test must be given covering the required training topics for each hazmat employee. PHMSA does not set a testing method or standard for that matter and can be written, verbal, performance-based, or a combination of one or more of these. We leave it up to you to determine an adequate level of competency for your hazmat employees. We hope that the company's safety culture will set the bar high, but regardless, it needs to be documented that a test was performed and completed. Each hazmat employee's training record must include hazmat employee's name, most recent training completion date, description, copy, or location of the training materials, name and address of the person providing the training, certification that the hazmat employee has been trained and tested. Here we have an example of a compliant training record. This is not an official form. However, this Word document is in the downloads pod or linked in the description of the YouTube recording. As you can see, this form has all the required elements of a compliant training record. Employee name. Most recent training date, broken down into the general elements of general awareness, function specific, safety training, and security awareness, and all the way down to in-depth security if needed. Description, copy, or location of the training material, name, address of person providing the training, and lastly, the certification that the hazmat employee has been trained and tested and signed off by the hazmat employer. Once you have created or filled out a hazmat employee's training record, you must retain it. So many companies fail to retain or they lose the record. This leaves the DOT inspector no choice. As the old saying goes, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. The hazmat employer must retain each record for as long as the employee is with that company, and for 90 days after the employee no longer works there, whether they were fired or quit or even moves internally to a non-hazmat employee position. I'm proud to say that our website is packed full of useful information to the hazmat community, and it isn't overly difficult to find what you are looking for. From an overview of our agency to special permits and letters of interpretation on the rules themselves, we make it all available in a searchable format. We have many tools at your disposal for all things hazmat. Downloadable and or printable materials in which we put the regulations into a much easier to read format, most of which are free of charge. These materials will help you to take things at your own pace. We give examples of forms, formats you can use, and give checklists to help you with the items that may get overlooked. We encourage you to peruse our selections, and if there is something you feel should be listed, feel free to reach out to us via our website, and we can help you find it, or we can look at creating it if it's something new. PHMSA has training modules online that you can take advantage of to bolster your training program. Each hazmat employee can register at this link and take the general awareness portion of their training. They will be tested via this portal, and a certificate of completion will be generated. Remember, it is up to the hazmat employer to certify that this training is sufficient for their employees. We will soon have security awareness modules online at this same link. I cannot say enough about these folks. Heck, I use them from time to time as they have access to information that would take me more time than I want to spend looking for a Federal Register from 2003, for example. They can answer training questions too. By phone, you can reach them at 1-800-HMR-4922. By email at phmsa.hm-infocenter@dot.gov. You can have a subject matter expert get you the answer that you need. Have a highly technical question? Ask away, because even if these folks don't have access to the immediate answer, they have direct access to the folks that wrote the rule right outside their door. How's that for insider information? Please utilize these folks if you have any troubles finding the answer to your questions. They are truly there for you and are super friendly and helpful. This wraps up the presentation. I sincerely hope you gained some additional insight into the Hazmat training requirements as set forth by the DOT. And you will find the tools that we have offered helpful in developing or improving your training program.